Janice, I will use this just because I tend not to project particularly well. Can everybody hear me all right? Okay, very good. The deadline that has passed is June 1st, which was the deadline to change parties. So if you had wanted to do that, too bad for you. You can't do that unless if you're an independent and you want to vote in one of the primaries. I know in the Democrat primary, you can actually go and that day register as a Democrat and vote in the Democrat primary. I have to admit, I don't know what happens on the Republican side, having never voted in a Republican primary. So.
You can vote against Cobalt.
What?
You can vote against Cobalt.
You could, or you could vote for me and I'll beat him. That's the plan. So, at any rate, it's really fun for me to be here. I actually lived in Salina. My husband and I we met and married in Denver, and he wanted to go into private practice. He's a physician, and so he got an offer at the Salina Clinic, which I don't think is here anymore, but was here 32 years ago when we moved. And so we thought about whether or not we wanted to make Kansas our permanent home, because I'd grown up in the military and I'd moved just enough and didn't want to do that anymore. So we looked at it, we said absolutely yes, and there were really two reasons for that. One, because of your great public schools that existed here 32 years ago. We've got a little work to do on them now. But then it was also that great sense of community that I feel in Kansas like I feel no place else. And Salina was very special that way. I really loved living around 5th and 6th and 7th generation Kansans, especially since I've been somewhat nomadic as a kid and traveled everywhere. It was nice to be with people who actually had very, very deep roots, and I just sort of let them adopt me and make me one of their own. So we've been here. When I was living here, I at first I didn't have a job, and so I spent all of my time with my then 15-month-old, and the library was my salvation. This had the best children's library I had ever seen. It was great. And so Kathleen and I were here day in and day out, taking full advantage of what this library had to offer. And it is even better now. I mean, it was really good then, but I'm very impressed with what Salina has done with their library and so many other things that really do make Salina a great place to live, including Scheme Pizza. So, we spend every Thursday night at Scheme Pizza, so, including celebrating Kathleen's second birthday many years ago. So, at any rate, so I've given you a little background. Did grow up in the military, came here 32 years ago. I started my career actually in mental health. I was a recreation therapist, and I worked first at a prison, minimum security prison for boys in Illinois, and then after graduate school at Indiana, I went to New York and worked at a state psychiatric facility for children when they actually still had those things. And so I spent about 7 years there, moving up into administration, and then moved to Denver after that, and I got a very similar job, but with a different clientele at National Jewish Hospital for Respiratory and Immune Disease, which had inpatient then, also with a long-term psychiatric center, because many of the kids had dual diagnosis of severe respiratory disease and emotional illness. So I spent another 7 years doing that, and then Ted and I made the decision to move here. When I got here, spent 4 months with my kid at the library, and then I took the job as the first executive director of the Kansas Recreation and Park Association. For those of you who have been around for a while, you might remember Don Jolly, who was your director of Parks and Recreation here. And I know Don's a character. I just saw him in Marion, where he is in an assisted living facility. I saw him a couple weeks ago. Don and I we knew each other because both of us had been very involved on the national level. Don actually went on to become president of the National Recreation and Park Association. I was very engaged with the National Therapeutic Recreation Association because of my work in recreation therapy. So at that point, the Kansas Recreation and Park Association had been a volunteer member organization since its development in the 1940s. I became the first executive director, first paid executive director. My office was under the stairs in Old Memorial Building, where you had the kids who couldn't stay in real school went over there, so I had them all running around, and then some other people in the gym. But that was where my office was, and I stayed there until we moved the office over to Topeka, and that's where associations like to be, and so that's where we are. And my husband took a position with Cotton O'Neill, Stormont Vale, over in Topeka. So when I did the KRPA thing for 18 years. I got to travel all over the state, everywhere, to every town, no matter what its size, trying to work with each of the communities to really make them a better place for kids and families. You know, and much like, I mean, you have a fabulous Park and Recreation department here in Salina, and that's what we did, is we went around and worked to make them all as professional, as good as the one that you all had here in the city of Salina. So when 2004 came, I was asked to run for the Senate, and I said yes because I told you one of the reasons that we moved here was because of the great public schools. And I was watching my state senator at the time voting to slash funding for schools. And that just can't happen. I mean, that's what makes Kansas what Kansas really is. So I said no, I ran and I won. And so I've spent now 14 years in the state Senate. And I've been very privileged to be the ranking minority on the Ways and Means Committee, which is the Budget Committee, which gives you in-depth look at what's going on in Kansas, where the issues are, where the problems are, and what needs to be done to solve them. I also have been the ranking minority member on the Public Health and Welfare, which is a huge issue for the state of Kansas. So I've got tons of experience and knowledge about the way our state government works, or at this point in time, doesn't work. And that's, you know, I'm running for governor because I want every kid to have the exact same opportunities my kids and my family had when we moved here 32 years ago. I want those good schools and I want those good jobs back in the state of Kansas. And I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know, that the past 8 years has been very hard on Kansas. The Brownback-Collier agenda has really dismantled this state. We know that it's decimated our public school system. I think it's damaged the very fabric of our communities. And you can go across state government, you can look down into any agency, and what you will see is destruction and diminishment of their ability to perform the services that they're supposed to be providing for the people in the state of Kansas. Think about our foster care system. Think about our mental health system. Think about our roads. DCF is our foster care, folks. Yeah. Think about the fact that we did not expand Medicaid, so that we've left 150,000 people in the state of Kansas without access to health care. But even beyond that, we have let some of our rural hospitals close or get very close to closing, and we have forfeited over 5,000 to 7,000 jobs that would have come to Kansas. We left $2.5 billion and growing on the table in Washington, D.C. to be sent out to other states for them to take care of their people and them to grow their economies. I think Louisiana just expanded Medicaid last year. In 1 year, they have seen $317 million in savings in Medicaid. But in addition to that, they have created 50,000 new good-paying jobs in their state. So it's huge, and that's probably the dumbest thing we've done since I've been in the legislature, was let that opportunity pass us. I will tell you that the legislature did pass Medicaid expansion last year, but the governor vetoed it. This year, we weren't even allowed to talk about it because they didn't want that. We would have passed it, and they didn't want that bill to go onto Collier's desk because Jeff Collier would have vetoed it. Jeff Collier is the architect of our CanCare program, and for those of any idea, the CanCare is the privatized Medicaid program where we have farmed out to for-profit, out-of-state 3 insurance companies all of our Medicaid services to our folks. And that was Jeff Collier's handiwork. And we know what has happened from that. I mean, if you have a child or a family member with a disability or an elderly member, you know how difficult it's been to get services provided. If you're a provider, you know how difficult it's been to get paid. And if you're a hospital, you know that you are now providing uncompensated services even to a greater degree because one of the things that the ACA did was say, okay, you expand Medicaid, we'll give you those dollars, but we're going to take away the disproportionate share, which has always been the money that they've given to hospitals to pay for uncompensated care. So that went down, and we didn't expand Medicaid, so our hospitals are now eating it in a major way. So I can go on and on about all of the things that have happened in the state of Kansas over the 8 years. I think you know most of them. I know them intimately. I've been on the front lines watching this happen, or yelling and screaming about it, or fighting against the policies that the Brownback and Collier administration have brought to us. The reason I think you need to vote for me for governor is because you need somebody who can walk into that office on day one, knows where the problems are, knows how to solve them, and has the relationships to bring people together. That's imperative. This is not, being governor is not a one-person show. It really has to be teamwork. You can't get a thing done if you can't get the legislature to come on board with you. And so that's one of the things that I know how to do and do very well. I run, my Senate district is 10 points Republican plus. So I've run in Republican districts. I've won in Republican districts 4 times. And what I've done in the legislature is, I was a math major when I went into college. I switched over to psychology later, but initially I was a math major, so I can count. And I'm waiting to have to count to 10 in the Democrat Senate caucus. We're right now at 9. But it takes 21 votes to get anything done. So I've got to go across the aisle and form relationships over there so that those folks will work with me so that we can get good policy passed. For the first 6 years I was in the legislature, it was really fun. We had Pete Berngard, remember good old Pete, in there, and others like him, who I was able to work very easily with to pass good legislation. Then we went to the dark years. Remember they took Pete out, and along with Pete, they took a number of the other moderate Republicans out, leaving me really 2. There were 2 of them who were, rock solid moderate Republicans after what Brownback did to folks in 2012. So we went through what I call the dark years. Then all my reaching across the aisle was for naught because they were not the least bit interested. So I really changed my role to be more of a, let's expose them for what they're doing, and just pulling the curtain back on the shenanigans and the terrible policy and the lack of transparency and all the kinds of things that were going on. Fortunately, in 2016, we started to see a turn. In Salina, you guys brought us Randy Hardy, and Randall, as he goes in the Senate, I want to thank you very much. He's been a breath of fresh air after the one before him. And so, but along with Hardy came a number of other moderate Republicans, particularly, and we did pick up 1 Democrat in the Senate. So it's been very different. We've been able to go back, and Democrats and moderates working together, we've been able to form a moderate majority, which is how we overturned, for the most part, the Brownback-Collier tax experiment of 2012-2013, and have been able to put Kansas back on a road to recovery. Long way to go. We have a lot more to do, and we got to continue to elect good people in 2018, and then we've all got to put our nose to the grindstone and just figure this out and develop plans to restore Kansas to its former glory. I think I'm going to stop there. I see inquisitive minds here, and I'm hoping that there will be some good questions that will come out of this group. Okay.
Okay. In my previous life, I worked at Farm Credit Bank and Lynn Rogers, and I wanted you to expand on what you think he brings to the ticket.
I'd be glad to do that. Lynn Rogers is my lieutenant governor running mate. He's also my seat mate in the Senate. He sits right next to me, so I've been able to train him well over the 2 years that he's been there. But he came in pretty well trained anyway. Lynn is from Wichita, originally from Nebraska, but moved to Wichita 30-some years ago. And so Lynn, in addition to serving on the Wichita School Board for 16 and a half years, Lynn also spent 30 years as an ag banker. And in that capacity, Lynn has traveled all over the state of Kansas and into every rural community that you can imagine, working with our farmers and ranchers to make investments, to help their companies grow and help their communities grow. So he brings just a wealth of that kind of knowledge, talent, and awareness about Western Kansas, rural Kansas, in a way that really very few other people know. And I'm delighted to have that. And it was an important part of the selection. I wanted to make sure that all Kansans knew that this was a team that would be representing them. I recognize I live in dead center Topeka, even though my district has quite a bit of rural area in it. I really wanted people to know that we were going to be there for all Kansans. And Lynn is the first shot over that bow. But then the other thing that we've done that I think speaks to that issue is that Lynn was serving actually as my campaign treasurer when I plucked him to be lieutenant governor. And so we needed to replace my treasurer, and we replaced my treasurer with a gentleman named David Toland. And David Toland is a young guy who is from Iola, Kansas. He's one of those 7th generation people. He lives in his great-grandparents' house right now. But he had been back in DC doing some things. He came back. He chose to come back to his hometown, and he runs what's called Thrive Allen County, which is an award-winning economic development approach to rural living. And so we have put him in as campaign treasurer, and he is at this moment, we just spoke today, we're developing our rural economic development policy, which we will be rolling out shortly. So we're dead serious about it. We understand the importance of our agricultural community. It is who Kansas is, and we can't forget that. And we need to preserve it, not only for the economic stimulus that it brings to our state, but also for the cultural. We are people of the land, and we need to recognize that. So, long answer, but I hope that's... Yes, sir.
So it sounds like you have a lot of experience dealing with children with mental illness in different situations. We have seen far too many mass shootings, particularly at schools, over the past few years. Very often during those debates, it ranges from gun control to gun rights advocates saying, oh, we need to reform how we handle mental illness. And then we only talk about mental illness in the aftermath of mass shootings. And so I'm wondering what steps, if any, you think could be taken on the mental health front to possibly stop some of these things from happening before they do.
I think the mental health issue is a very important one to address for a whole host of reasons, including the mass shootings that we've seen. But I think to suggest that it's only a mental health problem is to be very short-sighted. And so, I've been a supporter of Second Amendment rights and will continue to be. I think it's okay for law-abiding citizens to carry concealed and to hunt. And I have any problem with that. The conversation has really changed, though, since Kansas was first talking about concealed carry and hunting. And it's now we're talking about the slaughter of our children and our teachers in the classroom. That goes way too far. So for the last couple of years, 2 years ago, I voted to ban guns on college campuses. It did not pass. Last year, I voted to ban guns in public hospitals, community mental health centers, and also public adult care homes. That did pass. This year, we passed a bill that will allow law enforcement to take guns away from those who have domestic violence convictions. We tried on a number of other things, bump stocks, 3-day waiting periods, universal background checks, the red flag, if you're known to be a danger to yourself or to others, law enforcement can temporarily take away your guns. We try and ban on campus carry again. We did not pass any of those, but the vote was so different. 2 years ago, when I voted to ban guns on campus, I think the vote was about 8 for it and 32 against that. This time the vote was 20-20. So we are very close. What I plan to do as governor is to convene law enforcement, mental health folks, educators, public health folks, and educators and parents and students, and get them together, and as a group, we're gonna craft a gun sense policy, a comprehensive gun sense policy for the state of Kansas. And then my plan is to use the governor's office as a bully pulpit to shepherd as much of that through the legislature as I can possibly get. You know, we need to make Kansas sane on guns again. And I will tell you that I think I represent the vast majority of Kansans when I suggest these things. I felt that, you know, even when I was going door to door in 2016. And yeah, I can remember I was in Wamego knocking on a door, and the guy answered the door and he said, it was a libertarian. You know that when you go to the door, you know what party they are. And so this guy was libertarian. First question out of his mouth is, where are you on the Second Amendment? I said, well, you know, I actually used to have an A rating with the NRA. He goes, why don't you anymore? I said, because I voted to ban guns on campus. He goes, well, that makes sense. And so I think that's really where people are, and I think that's what we need to do, is we need to put our policy where our people are and protect our kids and our teachers. Yes?
So if you are elected governor, what will you do, how will you get Medicaid expansion to happen?
I don't think it would be very hard because we did pass it. You know, both the House and the Senate passed it, and the governor vetoed it. I won't veto it. So we'll only need 21 votes in the Senate and 63 votes in the House, and it will become law in the state of Kansas. So I think we can do this because I won't veto it.
And then what would happen to CanCare?
Well, it doesn't change CanCare. I have a plan for CanCare too. I fought like the devil not to privatize CanCare. You know, all the problems we had, we knew. We knew this would happen. You cannot put a for-profit motive on medical services. Whenever you do that, bad things are going to happen, particularly the public medical services, Medicaid. So, you know, all of the inability to be deemed eligible for services, the slashing of services for folks, particularly those on the waivers, you know, where they're just getting home and community-based services in their home so they can stay in their home. We knew this would all happen. So it's not something that can be done overnight because we have contracts and other, you know, issues to deal with. Plus we have to get an infrastructure in place ready to transition to. I have been working over the last couple of years with advocates and providers to you know, show me what that might look like. How might we be able to make this transition away from the for-profit situation and back under what I call a sort of a quasi-governmental nonprofit umbrella. Any of you real wonky types will remember that we used to have the Kansas Health Policy Authority, which was exactly that. It had its own board and, well, authority. And you know, they oversaw all of our medical services, insurance, Medicare, we do have Medicaid, and state employee, everything related to that. I want to put it back under that sort of umbrella. Not sure that we'll go away from managed care per se, because I think managed care actually can work if it's done right. You just can't have the profit motive in there. You know, I mean, I think it can provide integrated services, behavioral and physical health. But once you put the profit motive in there, then you're going to just see services slashed or avoided at all costs. So that's a plan. That will probably take a couple of years at least to get done, but that's high on my radar screen to get that done. Yes, sir.
You mentioned, well, first of all, could you spell your campaign treasurer's name for me?
I could. His first name is David, spelled like you'd think it would be, and his last name is Toland, Toland. Asked by a reporter, they always do this.
And my follow-up question is, you mentioned the rural economic development plan you guys are developing. Does that include marijuana or hemp in any way?
Well, you know, we actually did just pass a hemp bill. So we got that done. It took us 8 years. You know, and hemp is with no THC, nothing. You know, it is not marijuana in the least that even come close. But even with that, it took us about 8 years to get that passed. So that will become a new crop in the state of Kansas, and I'm fine with that. You know, we really do need to be expanding our economy and our economic possibilities. We have had less, I don't want to say success, I just want to say we've not been able to really move the medical marijuana issue very far, very fast. We did have a vote a couple of years ago on the CBD oils that you use with kids with severe seizures, Dravet syndrome in particular. We came very close, but couldn't get that one passed. And then there's been talk about medical marijuana, but no real action on it. And recreational marijuana has, you know, occasionally will get mentioned, but it's way down path. I think what will happen in Kansas is what happens with most things in Kansas. It will take us a while, you know, to keep moving ahead on a certain issue. I do believe that we will address the medical marijuana again soon, and I am more optimistic than I've been in a long time that we can actually make some headway on that. And once we get that, then, you know, we just see where we go from there. Yes.
So during the previous year, or I guess this year, the legislature approved an increase or pledged to increase funding for education in the state, phased in over the next 5 years. And my question to you is 2 parts. 1, do you think that that's enough, or should we do it more? And 2, if so, how are you going to pay for it?
Okay, he's asking about school funding. We really do need to go back to last year, because last year we put another $293 million, close to $300 million into education. And then this year we put another $535 million into education. And that's what's gone over to the court. What I think our state attorneys did not do, and they should have done, was to dig into the budgets and realize that there are a number of other things that we did that actually will directly impact our K through 12 system in particular. We created, not the way I would have done it, but it's a good start, some pilot projects where we will be actually funding psychologists and social workers, but they'll be under the auspices of our community mental health centers or our safety net clinics or other behavioral health providers, but they will then be in the schools. They'll be contracted with the schools, they'll be in the school all year long, providing the support services that those teachers need for those kids who have some mental health issues. But then they'll be over in the safety net clinic or in the community mental health center for access during the summer and holidays, so that those families and those kids don't take that vacation, which doesn't work when you're dealing with mental health issues. So we started that. That's one of the programs that I plan to really expand as much as possible, because I think it's just imperative. I mean, it deals with the gun issue, because some of those kids are wandering around school with known mental health problems and not getting services. Hopefully this will help make sure that they get the service they need when they need them, and prevent some problems, guns and other things. So that's one thing that we did. The other thing that we did is, you know, over the 8 years, Brownback and Collier just robbed our Children's Initiative Fund, which was set up back in the late 90s to deal specifically with early childhood education. And we put money back into that. Early childhood will be a feature focus of my administration. I'm a firm believer in early intervention. You know, it probably stems from my work in the Prison for Boys. They were 14 and up by the time I got to them. I thought, a little late, wish we could have gotten here earlier. Same thing when I was working with adolescents with mental health issues. I thought, if only we could have intervened earlier. And there are some model programs that are happening in this state right now. There's down in Wichita, I don't know anybody knows Barry Downing and the Opportunity Project that he has run down there. He's had these going now for 15, 20 years. He's got 3 centers down there, and what Barry does, and this is a public-private partnership, and so they contract with these families prenatally. You know, a woman gets pregnant and the family comes in and they sign a contract with the center, and then the center works with wraparound services. So it's not just education, it's also health and mental health and family preservation and all sorts of things that go on, you know, within this center. And their success rate of taking kids to the age of 5 and getting them into public school, into kindergarten, no special education, and then they follow them a little longer, the incarceration rate, much different than it is for kids who've not gone through this program. And there are others. Pittsburgh has this great family resource center that does something very similar. We need to recognize those kinds of programs. We need to replicate those kinds of programs. It's a wise investment on the part of Kansas. We will save a ton of money long-term in special education and in juvenile detention and all sorts of other areas if we get to them early. So I will put a very heavy emphasis on early intervention for both our children and their families. Yes.
Well, naturally, I went to work for the state in January of '98, and so naturally I have, and retired January of 2017.
What'd you do?
I was an environmental scientist, and it was really a shock when I went to work in '98 how employees were treated. And I mean, even then, when there was due process, when we had civil service protections, but there was, okay, I never really understood the comic strip Dilbert until I went to work for the state of Kansas. I didn't think it was funny because I didn't understand it.
Yeah.
And it's tragic, really, that what the people who work for the state of Kansas and serve as citizens endured then, and even worse so, you know, under Brownback, the loss of many, many positions, the overwork,
Lots of expertise.
lots of expertise, denigrating the abilities of staff. The top-down management is dark ages stuff. And now, I mean, there's not even civil service protection. The agency I worked for started that a couple of years before it was even legal, and no one said a peep. So, I mean, it's harmful to employees' health. I retired early, even though I considered myself a strong person. I retired fairly early because of the emotional abuse and professional abuse that I endured as an employee and serving these people. So I guess my question is, that's a deep hole to dig out of, but it needs to be done, and what would you do as governor?
Okay, well, you actually, you know, I have a whole laundry list of things that I'm going to do, and it's frightening actually to think how much there is to do, because it's everywhere, it's everywhere. What you're talking about, I have witnessed firsthand, which is the dismantlement of the civil service protection system, you know, which was put into place a long time ago for some very good reasons. I mean,
But
so
it
much.
wasn't even enough.
Yeah, well, it always can do better, but at least there was something. Now there's
Right.
nothing.
Right.
You know, many of our employees were essentially blackmailed into giving up their civil service protections and going from classified to unclassified because it was the only way they could get a pay raise, and they hadn't had a pay raise in 10 years. So, and this went across agencies. And then you talk about the fact that, you know, you had fewer workers to do more work. That was everywhere. I mean, I can remember walking into the Department of Transportation building, and it was a ghost town. the positions were all gone. Just Carol after Carol after Carol with nobody in them. You go out to the eligibility, same thing. There was nobody working. Department of Revenue, try to ever get through Department of Revenue, and you can't. So they've just eliminated positions. They've done a lot of privatization, a lot of no bid contracts that have gone out that are not in the best interests of Kansans. You know, the one that was just in the paper with Revenue. This is I think an $80 million no bid contract that went to this vendor who couldn't even do the work. The state employees had to fix the platform. This is all about tax collection, and that vendor is getting 80 cents of every dollar collected. You know, trust me, the state employees were not getting that when they were collecting the money. So there, all these kinds of things. We've got hundreds, if not thousands, of no bid contracts that we need to review, and we will to see, and that should restore some of those state positions. I'll tell you, even the Brownback administration finally figured out that they had to restore some of the eligibility workers because Maximus, the group that they had subcontracted, wasn't doing the job. And so I think we'll see that. You know, again, these are all things that are going to take time to do, but it's a must. We have to do it. You know, we have a responsibility as a state to be providing certain services to folks. People pay taxes for them, and we need to make sure that they're there. So we will. And you know, I mean, we really have gone through a war in the poor, a war in the working class, you know, a war on everybody but the top 1% in the past 8 years. It has been across the board, and we've got two, you know, sort of less specific things, but we've got to change the culture in Kansas. And one way will be to elect a governor who thinks differently, acts differently, and cares differently, but also will put people in positions, in cabinet positions and below, who, one, know what they're doing, and two, are committed to the mission of the agency, and three, you know, have the skill set to manage and hire good people and bring them back and provide a healthy workplace for folks. So I'm all committed to that. Then the other thing we've got to do is we have to rebrand Kansas. You know, our brand has been so diminished over these past 8 years. You know, if you watch any late night comedy TV, you know, we have been Jimmy Fallon's best friend. So it needs to change, and that's what a governor can do. A governor can make a huge difference by just a presence and a bully pulpit and working on behalf of the citizens. The other thing that we will do that we're not getting now is when Congress does stuff or the president's doing stuff that really hurts Kansans. You know, where's your governor? Where has anybody, or a congressional delegation for that matter, where are they screaming and yelling about these tariffs? You know, they're not, and we should be. You know, that's the responsibility of your top elected leaders, is to be representing you on all levels. And so we just have a ton of work to do, but I know it, and I'm ready to do it. I want to do it, and I've got a lot of people who are chomping at the bit to help.
So I have a kind of on the revenue collection, no bid contract. So much of what's done is done in the name of cost saving, but I mean, you just said they get 80 cents of every dollar they
Last
get?
contract I saw, that's what it was, yes.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
That's a giveaway. So is this patronage? Is this just, I mean, you don't have to answer that question, but that's what I'm feeling.
I'm good with answering that question because, you know, I think whenever there's privatization, you always have to follow the money. Where is it going? And I can tell you that I have been fighting for the last couple of years to not privatize Osawatomie State Hospital. You know, that's been on the table. They've been pushing for that, and we've been fighting back. I've been in the forefront of that fight to not do that because I know what happens when you privatize those kinds of facilities, and it's not a good thing. You know, same thing with our prisons. You know, we've had I fought the whole Lansing prison situation. One, because I guess because I'm also, I really truly believe in the continuum. I believe in the continuum in corrections from, prevention to incarceration and then, release. And then I believe in the continuum in mental health services, again, with prevention, through institutionalization and discharge. I believe in all of that, and we're doing things in Kansas with no plan. Where, it's just willy-nilly, throw this and see how that sticks. And we need a plan. We don't know how many beds we need at Osawatomie because we don't have a plan. We have no idea. Or if we should even be putting more beds in one central location like that, or should we be putting them in regional centers, which off the top of my head makes a whole lot more sense, that you want to have psychiatric facilities near people's homes and their families so that they can be reintegrated into the community in a more seamless way. You can't do that when you have to drive 3 hours to Osawatomie or out to Larned. So
If you can get a bed.
if you can get a bed, and that's right.
Yeah.
And then the same thing, I would suggest the same thing with prisons. We just really don't know what we need because we have not done a study. And so we need to figure out what we need before we start spending hundreds of millions of dollars building. So I will put the kibosh on any of these projects if they haven't already gone too far. There's nothing I can do about it. It's just there. We did pass a piece of legislation though this year that even though the Lansing prison will be built by a private company, it cannot be privatized for operations. We passed a law that said that they can't do that. So we did put some protections in place. Yes.
On privatization of services for families, about 5 years ago, I think it was, child support collections was privatized. A lot of the state employees lost their jobs to that. They were offered lesser work for the for-profit company. But, and the prediction has come true that the for-profit company doesn't bother with the small amounts because of the way it's paid. And so if someone, and then they don't put in the hard work to do the investigations that are necessary to follow a deadbeat parent and get the support that the custodial parent needs. But I guess follow up on my question for those kinds of things are, as governor, would you have the ability to issue some kind of executive order to reinstate civil service or to expand an agency when, say like we have an existing contract when it expires with a private company? What kind of executive powers would you have?
The contracts are yes, that is an executive branch situation unless the legislature decides to intervene and put some restrictions on which they can do. And we've done, we did that with the prison, for instance. On the issue of civil service, I think it's probably going to need to be a combination. There probably are some things that I'll be able to do just by executive order. For instance, reinstate the LGBT non-discrimination, which Sebelius had put into place, and then Brownback rescinded it, and Collier will not put it back into place. I can do that. So I know I can do those kinds of things. When it comes to things that have to be changed by statute, I'm going to have to work through the legislature. But again, we've elected a pretty decent legislature right now. We still have a little ways to go. But if you've got a governor who is advocating for these kinds of things, there are ways to bring folks in and negotiate these kinds of things so that they feel part of it, but then they end up really moving back towards the position that you're interested in. I watched Sebelius do it for years. I know how it works. It can be done.
So you talked a little bit about no-bid contracts, and I know we rank as one of the worst as far as transparency. Our state government, as far as transparency, we're one of the worst. What do you plan to do to address that?
Just pull the curtain back. There's absolutely, really no need. I mean, there are some proprietary things every once in a while where you can't really, conduct all the business right in the public eye. That can happen. But not very often, should that happen, and most times there ought to just be some open discussion. And I think that's the real difference. I mean, what we've seen over the past 8 years is that a very select few get behind those closed doors. And it's often, it's obviously, people who are ideologically together, and often lobbyists, who should not be back there making policy or deals. We won't do that. We just will not do that, and we will do as much as is humanly possible to conduct our business the way it's supposed to be conducted. We'll go through bid processes, we'll do all that kind of stuff, and have fair hearings and give people a shot at getting the business if they've got the best offer. So we will change it a lot. And just the whole, again, it goes back to culture and attitude. I don't feel any need. I've always been sort of an open book, and I feel no need to hide what I'm doing. And I don't expect that as governor, I'm going to feel a great need to be hiding from you what I'm doing. I mean, I am representing you, I'd be spending your money, so I probably ought to be letting you in on the secrets. I hope to do that. And to hire people who do that. I mean, I think that's the other thing, is that, these people have been hired, they've been allowed to go out there and do things that just should not be done, and they're never called to task on it. Even when the paper tries to expose them, and they're still allowed to stay. We won't do that. We'll probably have bad apples. Every administration does, but we'll take care of it. Okay?
Well, I know that industry has been responsible for legislation over the years, but there's this group called ALEC that seems to be a real problem in terms of governing our state. And I spent 30 years in Texas, and they had a great hand in some of what happened there that brownback lark did well here.
Well, ALEC, for those of you who don't know, is the American Legislative Exchange Council. And it is a well-funded group. I believe the Koch brothers give them a fair chunk of change, as do others, though many companies have pulled out over the past few years as they've gotten sort of a bad rep. But what they do is they convene legislators and lobbyists. And lobbyists actually sit. There are other groups that convene legislators, but this is the only one that actually allows lobbyists from the industries to be sitting at the table crafting legislation, model legislation. That's what they do. They put together model legislation, whatever area it is that they want to push. And then the legislators who subscribe to ALEC and attend their meetings will bring that legislation back, and they will have our revisers put it into our bill form and then introduce it and try to work it through the system. It has created many problems for the state of Kansas, particularly over those 4 dark years where we had no counterbalance. So they were able to get a lot of really bad things through. I think if any of you remember the HOPE Act, they got passed in 2015. I always called it the Hopeless Act, but it had to do with taking any kind of assistance from families. So whether it was cash assistance, food stamps, child care assistance, it was a draconian, brutal bill, and that was an ALEC product. They were trying to push that all across the state. So that's on my bucket list too. Things to do, because we really do need to reverse that. As a result of that HOPE Act, we now have more kids in foster care than we've ever had before. When Brownback came into office, we had 5,000 kids, which sounds like a lot of kids. We now have over 7,700 kids who are in our foster care system. And when we were debating that HOPE Act, I was saying, and some others were saying, you do this and you just watch our foster care system explode. Because what we were doing was we were taking, the safety net out from underneath already vulnerable families. And sure enough, they couldn't keep it together and they lost their kids to the system. And then the system because we've dismantled all of that. We don't have any family preservation workers to go out and work with those families to try to help them stay together, nor do we have reintegration workers at the other end of that spectrum, trying to get them back into either their biological family or an adopted family. So we get kids who are just stuck, and that's why we're approaching 8,000 kids in our foster care system. It's immoral, it's wrong, and we really do need to change those kinds of things. And things like the Hope Act are things that I'll be working with the legislature in hopes that we can at least turn that ship a little bit.
Okay.
Well, the other thing that I'm concerned about is with the firearms. There's no, with this new open carry thing, there's no training, there's no education. I've never been a fan of Dan Patrick. I used to listen to him on the radio. He was a nut then, he's a nut now. But he made some sense at Santa Fe a couple weeks ago when he talked about the legal ramifications of shooting your gun in public. That if you injure a bystander, you're criminally negligent. You are potentially a threat. We have a lot of people running around carrying guns who see themselves as the saviors of the planet. In Texas, according to the Texas Monthly, the people for whom the state of Texas has the least problem around firearms are the people who have concealed carry training. And it seems to me that it's the education piece, because what you learn in that, to some degree, are the legal, ethical issues around firearm ownership and the ramifications of that. And I don't know how we deal with some of this with this vast array of people who are just running loose with.
Well, I think that's part of what will go into the discussion when we're talking about gun sense policy in the state of Kansas, because I would agree with you that training, education is another thing that we need to reinstate. And so that would just be part of the larger discussion on what else we could do.
Roger, do you feel like there's even like a single class, do you think that can fill the immaturity gap for that 18 to 21-year-old?
Well, the immaturity gap is a problem, and the real problem with 18 to 25-year-old people is the frontal lobe is not developed until about 25. So we have granted the right to 18-year-olds who can't think well organizationally to carry guns on a college campus. To me, that is absolutely insane.
We'll work to get that changed, because I would agree with you. And what it does to the suicide rate on campuses is frightening. Fortunately, we did not pass the bill that would have lowered age for carrying pistols and stuff this year. That's one bad thing that did not get passed, and that has to do with Moms Demand Action. I don't know if any of you are involved in Moms Demand Action here, but those women were at the Capitol every day until 3 o'clock in the morning if they needed to be. And I think legislators were just afraid to even bring it up because they were there. So thank you for your advocacy. I know I'm giving a hook here.
That's okay. I'm not,
Okay.
it's up to you.
I'll go ahead and go with you. I know you guys have been very patient. You've sat here a whole hour. I know 50 minutes is the limit usually.
I'd like to just know, what is the top, you've been all over the state now for a while. Have we missed any issues in our questions that you think are top of other Kansas?
Women's reproductive rights, guns is definitely a big one. Education has been a big one. Rural economic development has been a big one, and I would say women's reproductive rights and healthcare in general have been the big issues that have been out there. And so, if anybody wants me to talk about that, I'm glad to talk about that.
I see some environmentalists here who haven't asked a question about Kansas environment. I'm gonna ask about water.
Okay. You have a specific question? Or we just,
We're running out of it. We're
yeah,
gonna
we
get
are.
hotter and hotter, and so I'm just
We
wondering
are.
what the
And,
plan is for that.
that's another area where, we've known for a long time, and water is not like, something you can just budget for every 2 years and, turn the faucet on, turn it off, and, and it works. you know, it's much like our transportation program. It's gotta be probably even longer term than transportation. You know, there has been a 50-year water plan put together by some people who know a lot about this, but the problem has been is that neither Brownback nor Collier has funded any of it. I mean, I think we put some chunk change back into the water plan this year, but it's minor. You know, it's not the kind of money we're going to need to go long term. So I'm hoping that what we can do with water is pretty much what we've just done with transportation, because it's another area that's expensive and requires long-term planning. We put a comprehensive transportation task force together this year, so we'll have industry leaders getting together and, you know, really trying to craft another 10-year plan, but also looking for alternative funding sources. And I think we need to do the same thing with water, you know, only over a longer period of time. You know, we know what the issues are. We have some solutions to them, but nothing is free. You know, it's gonna take investment on the part of the state of Kansas. And I think that goes to the rural economic development too, because a lot of that problem exists in our rural communities.
When Professor Bedema was at KU as a monitor on climate change, the model showed that from Salina west, it's going to be hotter and drier, and from Salina east, hotter and wetter. And I understand there's another study now on the north-south, and it's again Salina right at the bullseye. So to get a discussion in the bar or the coffee shops about what 408 parts per million means now, and what 500 parts per million is going to mean in by 2050 or whenever. It all depends, of course, on the rate. There's a lot of denial in the reality of climate change, even though we have storms that are larger, more frequent, and so on. Is there any way for a government, perhaps working through the schools, to make climate change a matter of real discussion and what the implications might be? It has to be one of humanity's two most important environmental problems.
Water and air. We have an elected school board, statewide school board, that I believe are the ones responsible for approaching on those kinds of things. I really don't like when the legislature dictates to our state school board, who are duly elected officials, curriculum that they need to. That doesn't mean there can't be suggestions or prompting and whatnot, but I think when it comes right down to it, I think we go to our elected school board leaders and we say, we want you to discuss this, contemplate this, and implement this in due time. But I think that's where that conversation is best held.
I also think part of that is keeping due process strong, so that if a science teacher talks about climate change, he does not have to fear for his job. Because I think most young most teachers in a secondary setting, everybody wants to teach this stuff. We all understand how important it is, but keeping due process strong, so that if somebody goes to the school board and says, that man told my kid that climate change is a thing, and I have a book here that says it's not, you know, that teacher needs due process. You know, keep it strong.
I would agree, and you know, it's the sort of the same thing with state employees. We need to put those protections back in place. You know, I forgot about the war on teachers. That's also gone on.
And you know, I don't know that due process has been kind of chewed around the edges. I don't know that teachers, although they are certainly under attack.
Well, no, we did, on the state level, we did say no. We left it up to the locals but we took away the statewide protection. And really left up to your local school board, who can be very influenced by a few loud folks in the community.
But there is a need for a state standard reinstated, so those local school boards, it's not enough to say, we gave it to the school board. I mean, I appreciate the position, but I think that's not a strong enough position on this issue.
Well, I'm not talking about the local school boards. I'm talking about, I'm talking, yes. And that's what I'm talking about, the state school board, not your local school boards. I think they're the ones who set curriculum and do those kinds of things. And so, and I, you know,
The state school board doesn't set a position on tenure, do they?
What, your school board?
The state school board does not set due process.
I believe, well, not now. I think that we did have due process was at the state level. Then we stripped it away and left it to the locals to do. So that's, I think, something that we need to look at reinstating on the statewide level.
No, just what about the bully pullet of the governor and making that an issue? The climate.
Are you talking the climate?
Yeah.
You know, certainly those kinds of things can be done. And, you know, if we're talking about a water plan, which I know that in the first term of the Kelly administration, we're going to be talking about water plan because we can't not talk about it. So along with that would come issues like climate change and other scientific issues that sometimes people don't really want to talk about too much. So,
but the water plan is not a derivative of the reality of climate change. The water plan is a derivative of the mining of the fossil water and also the movement through the system, the water system.
yeah, I have trouble separating those two because I see them, you know, when I think about fracking and I think about water in relationship to that also. So I have more trouble separating those two. So, you know, if I'm going to deal with that, it's probably going to be as as a package rather than trying to separate those two out.
But I just want to make one point is that actually all of these issues, the one thing that's central to it is the culture of violence. The culture of violence in this country. Violence against its children, violence against, nature, violence against the water, violence against the Native American, peoples, against blacks, against students, against, the globe, the Middle East. I mean, all of these immigrants, all of these are so, and what we tend to do is we sort of cherry pick our sort of symptoms, we're gonna just deal with the symptoms of the disease, of systemic violence. And so you talk about taking the guns away from our schools, but that's just a symptom of the disease. I mean, tomorrow they're gonna end up in our parks, other public spaces. Are we going to ban them there? I mean, it's just, until and unless we address the systemic problem, and it's all of it is related to violence, to cultural violence.
I hear what you say, and you make it sound overwhelming, and it is. But I think some of that can go back to our dealing with early intervention and mental health. And working with families, because I think a lot of violence stems from, comes out of our families, whether we're talking about domestic violence, and what are the things that we can do to help our families live more peacefully and be less likely to sort of send generation after generation of people who react in anger and violence. So I think, that's the only thing I can think of that we can do. And then our language, our verbalizations. I think we're seeing what's happening on the national level when we, now it's okay to build a wall and discriminate and, keep the refugees out. And we're being, treat women the way that, however you want to treat them. So I think that kind of rhetoric, you just need to change that tone. And, quite honestly, I can't say that, in terms of refugees and others, I think Brownback and Collier have been right there, and not particularly helpful. On some other things, that there hasn't been much rhetoric, but there's also been no anti-rhetoric. Nothing come out and say, that's not right. When I watch our congressional delegation just let, a pass on this and that and the other thing, I'm appalled. How can you just sit back and not say anything and act like that's normal? Because that's what we've done, is we've normalized that kind of talk and therefore that kind of action. Think about Charlottesville. I mean, it's just, those kinds of things are wrong, and I think that is one place where the governor, who will become the spokesperson for the state, can start to at least make a difference at that level. But then I do think we need to get down and we really need to work with our families, because that's where, if these problems are going to be solved, it's going to be solved at the family level.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. If you haven't signed up and you want to, I think Johanna has stuff for you over there. Anything you can do, if you're interested in the campaign, just get in touch and we'll take full advantage of you.